The night Adrian found my notebook, I stopped breathing for 11 seconds. I counted them, because counting was the only thing keeping my hands from shaking. He was sitting on the edge of my bed, my handwriting open in his lap, and he wasn't saying anything. That silence was louder than any scream could have been. "Theo," he said finally, not looking up. "Is this about someone real?" I wanted to lie. I had a lie ready. I'd had one ready for 3 years, polished smooth from overuse. But something about the way his thumb was pressed against the page, right over a line I'd written about the exact color of his eyes in low light, made the lie dissolve in my throat. "Yeah," I whispered. "It's about someone real." He finally looked up at me, and I braced myself for the moment I'd been dreading since we were 17 years old. But his face wasn't twisted into disgust or pity. It was something else entirely, something raw and unguarded that I had never once seen on him in 4 years of friendship. "Is it me?" he asked. That's where this story really begins. Not at that moment. That moment is actually the middle. To understand how we got there, and what happened after, you have to go back to the summer everything started, back before either of us understood what we were building between us, brick by brick, without ever meaning to. My name is Theo Bellamy, and I was 19 the summer Adrian Cole moved into the house across the street. I remember the exact day because I was mowing the lawn in the brutal June heat, shirt soaked through, cursing my father for making me do yard work on my one day off from the bookstore, when a moving truck rumbled to a stop across the road and a boy climbed out of the passenger seat like he owned the whole block. He had this way of moving, unhurried, like time bit around him instead of the other way around. Dark hair pushed back from his forehead, a gray t-shirt clinging to broad shoulders, and when he caught me staring, he didn't look away first. I did. "You're staring," he called out, gritting, and I nearly drove the mower straight into my mother's rose bushes. "Wasn't staring," I shot back, which was possibly the least convincing sentence in the history of the English language. He laughed, a real laugh, from somewhere deep in his chest, and jogged across the street with his hand already out. "Adrian, we just moved in. You live here?" "Theo," I said, shaking his hand, trying to ignore how warm his palm was, how firm his grip felt, how badly I wanted to keep holding on a second longer than was normal. "Yeah. Whole life, actually. Small world's about to get smaller then," he said. "I start at Ashgrove in the fall. You go there?" I did. We would end up in 3 classes together that September, and within 2 weeks, we were inseparable in the specific, all-consuming way that only happens once or twice in a life, the kind of friendship that swallows every other relationship whole, that makes people ask, half joking, if you two are dating. We always laughed that question off. I laughed hardest of anyone, because laughing was easier than examining why my stomach dropped every single time someone said it, like they'd caught me at something I hadn't caught myself at yet. That first year passed in a blur of late-night drives with the windows down, of him falling asleep on my shoulder during long movies neither of us were actually watching, of 100 small touches that meant nothing to him and everything to me. I built an entire private world out of moments that cost him nothing. A hand on my knee to make a point. An arm slung around my neck after a win at pickup basketball. His forehead pressed briefly to mine when he was too drunk at a party and needed someone steady. I told myself it was normal. I told myself a lot of things that year. The truth arrived quietly, the way most true things do, not in a single thunderclap of realization, but in the slow accumulation of moments I couldn't explain away anymore. It arrived on a Tuesday in October sophomore year, when Adrian showed up at my window at 11 at night, eyes red-rimmed, and asked if he could just sit with me for a while. His parents were fighting again, loud enough that he didn't want to be in the house. He climbed through my window like he'd done a dozen times before, dropped onto my bed, and put his head in my lap without asking, like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Can I just stay here a minute?" he asked, voice small in a way I'd never heard from him. I ran my fingers through his hair before I even decided to. He let out a breath, like something in him had been holding on too tight for too long, and in that moment, watching the tension drain out of his shoulders under my hands, I understood with total, terrifying clarity that I did not feel about Adrian Cole the way friends were supposed to feel about each other. I was in love with him. I had been for a while. And I had absolutely no idea what to do with that information except bury it somewhere deep and hope it stayed buried. It didn't. Feelings like that never do. If you've never spent years being in love with your best friend, I don't know how to fully explain the specific exhaustion of it, the way you learn to read a room in half a second, to catalog every accidental touch and replay it later in the dark, to build entire relationships out of near misses and moments that almost meant something. Junior year, we got matching part-time jobs at the same coffee shop downtown, which meant closing shifts together 3 nights a week. Just the two of us, the lights dimmed, the smell of espresso and cinnamon syrup, and 45 minutes of pure, unbearable proximity while we wiped down counters and stacked chairs. It was during one of those closing shifts that the almost kiss happened. The first one, anyway. There would be others. We were standing by the back door, waiting for his ride, both of us tired in that loose, unguarded way exhaustion brings. He was telling me some story about his cousin's wedding, gesturing with his hands the way he always did, and somewhere in the middle of the sentence he just stopped talking. "What?" I asked. "Nothing," he said. But he wasn't looking away. His eyes were doing that thing, that slow drop from my eyes to my mouth and back up, a movement so brief I might have imagined it if my whole body hadn't gone electric in response. We were standing closer than we needed to be. Close enough that I could feel the warmth coming off him, could see the small scar above his eyebrow from a childhood bike accident he'd told me about a dozen times. My heart was slamming against my ribs so hard, I was sure he could hear it in the quiet shop. "Theo," he said, low, and my name in his mouth sounded like something breakable. Headlights swept across the front window. "His ride?" He blinked like he was waking up from something, took a step back, cleared his throat, and mumbled something about seeing me tomorrow. I stood there alone in the dark coffee shop for a full minute after he left, hand pressed flat against my chest like I could physically hold my heart together. We never talked about it. That became the pattern, moments that cracked the surface of something enormous between us, followed by careful, mutual silence, like two people tiptoeing around a hole in the floor neither of us wanted to admit was there. I started writing in a notebook that year. Not journaling, exactly, more like a place to put the things I couldn't say out loud. Fragments about the way his laugh changed when he was truly happy versus performing happiness for other people. The exact shade of brown his eyes turned in early morning light. Lists of every time he touched me without meaning anything by it, next to lists of every time I'd wondered if maybe, just maybe, he had meant something by it after all. I never once considered that he'd read it. That notebook was the one place I let myself be fully, dangerously honest, and I guarded it like a secret because it was one. Senior year, Adrian started seeing someone. Her name doesn't matter to this story. She's not a character in it, not really, because she only lasted 6 weeks and I spent every single one of those 42 days in a kind of quiet agony I'd never experienced before. It wasn't rational. I knew that even while I was living through it. I had no claim on him. We weren't together. I'd never told him how I felt. But watching him text someone else with that same easy warmth he used with me, watching him leave early from our hangouts to go see her, watching him laugh at her jokes the way he laughed at mine, it felt like watching something get slowly taken from me that I'd never had the courage to claim in the first place. I got quiet during those 6 weeks. Distant, in the way you get when you're protecting something wounded. He noticed. Of course he noticed. He noticed everything about me, which was its own kind of torture, because it meant he cared, and caring wasn't the same as feeling what I felt. "You've been weird," he said one afternoon, cornering me at my locker between classes. "Did I do something?" "No," I said, too fast. "I'm fine." "Theo." He said my name the way he always did when he wasn't going to let something go. Flat, direct, patient. "We don't do that. We don't do the fine thing. What's going on with you?" I almost told him. I got so close that year, more times than I could count. The words would climb up my throat and sit right behind my teeth, and every single time fear won. Fear that I'd lose the only person who'd ever made me feel fully seen. Fear that his face would change the way I'd imagined it changing in 1,000 different nightmares. Fear, mostly, that saying it out loud would make it permanently, irreversibly real. "I've just had a lot going on," I told him instead. "College stuff. Family stuff." He studied me for a long moment, like he could see straight through the lie and was deciding whether to call it out. He didn't. He just pulled me into a hug right there in the crowded hallway and said quietly against my ear, "You know you can tell me anything, right? There's nothing you could say that would change things between us." I wanted so badly to believe that. I also knew, with the specific, bone-deep certainty of someone who has spent years anticipating disaster, that he had no idea what he was actually promising. The relationship with the girl ended in early November, quietly, without much fanfare. I never asked why, and he never offered. But something shifted after that. He started finding reasons to be around me more, not less. Late-night calls that stretched past midnight, plans made and remade just so we'd end up together instead of apart. I told myself it meant nothing. I told myself a lot of things that year, too. Which brings us back to where this story started, my bedroom, February of our senior year, Adrian sitting on the edge of my bed with my notebook open in his lap, asking me the only question that actually mattered. Is it me? I've replayed that moment more times than I can count, trying to find the version where I answered with confidence instead of the shaking, half-whispered truth that actually came out of me. "Yes," I said. "It's you. It's always been you." I watched every possible reaction cross his face in the space of about 4 seconds. Surprise, something that looked almost like relief, and then, unmistakably, fear of his own. Not fear of me. Fear of himself, I realized later, of a truth he'd been running from just as hard as I had. "How long?" he asked. "Since we were 17, I said. "Maybe before that. I don't actually know anymore where the line is between wanting to be around you and wanting to be with you. It stopped being two separate things a long time ago." He set the notebook down slowly, like it was something fragile, and for a moment neither of us said anything at all. The silence stretched so long I thought I might actually die inside it. "I have to tell you something," he finally said, "and I need you to let me get through it before you say anything, because if you interrupt me I don't think I'll be brave enough to finish." I nodded, throat too tight to speak anyway. That night at the coffee shop he started, junior year, by the back door, I wasn't waiting for my ride to be late. I was hoping it would be. I stood there for a solid minute wanting to kiss you so badly I couldn't remember how words worked, and then the headlight showed up, and I told myself I imagined the whole thing. I told myself that for 2 years, Theo. Every single time something happened between us that felt like more than friendship, I built a little story explaining it away, because the alternative terrified me more than almost anything ever has. "Why?" The question came out smaller than I meant it to. "Because you're not just someone I like," he said. "You're the person I built my whole life around without noticing I was doing it. And if I told you how I felt, and you didn't feel it back, I wouldn't just lose a chance with you. I'd lose you. The actual you, the friend, the person who knows me better than anyone alive. I couldn't survive that. So I decided it was safer to want you quietly forever than to risk losing you by saying it out loud." I felt something crack open in my chest, something that had been clenched tight for 3 straight years finally letting go all at once. "You're not going to lose me," I said. "Adrian, look at what I just handed you. A notebook full of 3 years of exactly how I feel about you. I was more scared of you knowing than I've ever been of anything in my life, and I still would rather you know than keep carrying it alone." He reached out then and took my hand, actually took it, laced his fingers through mine like it was the easiest, most natural thing in the world, like we'd been doing it for years instead of dancing around it for years. "I don't want to be careful anymore," he said, voice rough. "I'm so tired of being careful with you." "So don't be," I said. He leaned in slowly, giving me every chance to pull away, giving both of us time to change our minds if we needed to. Neither of us did. When our lips finally met, it wasn't like the movies, not fireworks or some explosive, cinematic thing. It was quieter than that, and somehow more overwhelming because of it. It was 3 years of almost finally landing somewhere real. It was relief shaped like a kiss. We stayed up half the night talking, really talking, for the first time without the careful walls we'd both built to protect ourselves. He told me about the 6-week relationship, admitted he'd started it partly to prove to himself that what he felt for me wasn't what he thought it was, and how badly that plan had backfired. I told him about every entry in that notebook, the ones I'd never planned on showing anyone, and watched his face soften with every word. Somewhere around 3 in the morning, exhausted and lighter than I'd felt in years, he pulled me close against his chest, and I fell asleep to the sound of his heartbeat, steady and sure, like a promise neither of us needed to say out loud anymore. I won't pretend everything was simple after that night. Coming out to our families took its own kind of courage, spread out over months instead of minutes. My mother cried, not from disappointment, she told me later, but from relief, because she'd suspected for over a year and had been quietly waiting for me to trust her enough to tell her myself. Adrian's father needed more time, and there were a few hard months where Adrian stayed at my house more nights than his own. We got through those months the way we'd gotten through everything else, together, honestly, without the careful distance that had defined the first 3 years of knowing each other. What surprised me most wasn't the fear, or the fights, or the adjustment. It was how easy the actual being together part turned out to be, once we stopped hiding it. All those years of careful choreography, the almost touches, the swallowed words, the elaborate excuses, dissolved into something so much simpler. We already knew each other completely. We'd just been too scared to call it what it was. There's a version of this story where I never show him that notebook, where fear wins, the way it almost did 100 times over 3 years. I think about that version sometimes, late at night, and it makes me hold on tighter to the version that actually happened. Adrian likes to tell people now that he fell in love with me the day I nearly drove a lawnmower into my mother's rose bushes because I couldn't stop staring at him. I like to remind him that he was the one who showed up at my window that October night and put his head in my lap like it was the most natural thing in the world, 3 years before either of us said a single true word about what we felt. Maybe that's what love actually looks like sometimes. Not a single dramatic moment, but a slow accumulation of small, quiet truths, waiting patiently for someone brave enough to finally say them out loud.